We are in Ecclesiastes chapter 10 this morning. We will look at most of the passages on the screen. If you don't have a Bible, then you can look at the screen, you can look at your fancy, amazing cellular device, or you can grab a Bible in the back and borrow it or keep it. It is completely up to you. We are in chapter 10, and the preacher, the writer of Ecclesiastes, we call him the preacher, is leading us in a direction of what appears to be a number of different random thoughts throughout this chapter. They look sort of disconnected. There are a couple chapters in this book where he's just throwing out short, pithy, little proverbial kind of thoughts and ideas. And this chapter, we're going to kind of group them in similar thoughts and really basically about what it means to be wise, and even more so in chapter 10, what it means to be foolish. Now, somebody in the news recently, a Christian recently, was labeled as extremely foolish. I'll pull up a picture of him this morning. There he is. His name was John Chow. Maybe you heard of him or saw him, his picture, or read a little bit about him. He was working through a sending organization. He had prepared to and did go to a small, very remote island that's actually part of the nation of India. He went to this people group that's very isolated, legally so. They were isolated intentionally to keep the rest of the world from coming in and communicating disease and changing their culture. John went to this group. He had at least one contact with them, got arrows shot at him. They missed him. I guess what I read is one of the arrows hit his Bible. He went away. He journaled about his experiences. He went back to the islanders, and this time he was not so fortunate. The arrows hit him and killed him, and he was left there on the island. So then the media explodes on the story, and most of what we heard was that he was a fool. He took his diseases, that we all have, that we're all used to or whatever, and the people on the island aren't. Not only was he a fool and gave up his own life, died there, but a fool in the sense of what he did and brought into this isolated islander group in India. So the question is, was he really that much of a fool? In the eyes of the world, he was pretty much condemned as a fool. A very interesting article written by Ed Stetzer. Ed Stetzer, I quote him every once in a while. He's a fairly well-known missiologist. He has a PhD, advanced degrees. He speaks and writes and does all sorts of things. So he is a credible voice when it comes to mission work. He wrote an article that appeared in the Washington Post, and the title, at least part of the title, was "Are Missionaries Fools?" And he at least in the article balanced things out. I don't know much of John Chow and his life, but Stetzer in the article kind of balances things out a little bit, that he wasn't foolish to the degree that a lot of the media outlets portrayed him to be, that he did do preparation. He did go through numerous vaccinations to try to not allow himself to, his body to bring in foreign diseases, whatever, that certainly would threaten the livelihood of the people there. And he did other things so that he could come in with some skills that might be of use or value to the people on this island. But that's not the whole story. There are some other things that Stetzer, and as I read the article, that I didn't agree with either, as far as how he came in. Legally, this island and this people group was closed off to the outside world, and he chose to break the law to go to this island. So that raises issues for anybody, believer or otherwise, that are thoughtful about what we're doing. Is there a point where you can say, I will obey God and not man, like what the apostles did in the book of Acts? Is this an example of that or not? It is a question that is definitely worth asking and trying to figure out the answer to. Other things that happened, that took place. So it's complicated. There are different levels here, nuances to what John Chow did. and then the fallout of what he did. It becomes very complicated. Many said he was foolish, a few said not so. So I bring up him, John, as an example to get us talking about foolishness, because sometimes it's not so cut and dry. It's not so black and white. Things get complicated quickly. When I was growing up, fool was a bad word. I mean, any way that we used it, we could not use it. It was right up there with all the other mother and fathers of bad words, okay? Could not use that, and for, good reasons. I mean, a lot of us throw around fool as a joke or as as nothing. But still, in some contexts, it's kind of harsh to call somebody a fool. And when you read the passage, it's very easy for a lot of us to read a passage in the Bible that talks about fools or foolish people and think, well, that's not me, right? That's other people who are fools, who have this bar way up there. So here's what's going on in this chapter. Just like John Chow, it's complicated when it comes to deciding what really is foolish and what isn't. And I think what the preacher is doing here is that he wants us to think about, to consider this morning, the foolishness that's in all of us. That it's not somebody else that's doing something really ridiculous, that there's stuff going on all the time in our hearts and the things that we think about that is, if we had to tell the truth, be honest, be open, yeah, that was foolish. I don't like admitting it. I certainly don't like revealing it to people who know me and that I want respect from, but at the end of the day, yeah, I did things or I thought things that would qualify me as being foolish. So how do you know if you're being a fool or not? How do you know if the things that you're doing really would qualify as foolish? So that's where chapter 10 takes us this morning. Foolish is as foolish does. Number one, foolish people, one way you can understand more about yourself and where the preacher takes us in the first few verses, foolish people miss the point. And we're going to try to figure out what the point is. Because these first 4 verses, it's kind of like this glob of different angles, different perspectives, different examples of what it means to be foolish and to just not get it. It's a grouping of similar foolish kind of things, foolish actions that reveal the character of someone. So again, you can't read it too quickly and gloss over things. You got to slow down and think about, okay, what's really going on? What really is foolish about this? So chapter 10, I have one verse up here, chapter 10, verse 3. Even when the fool walks on the road, he lacks sense, and he says to everyone that he is a fool. Now, you don't have to verbalize it. I'm a fool. Hey, I'm a fool. He's not, you could do that, but he's not going there. In the way that you walk, you are saying, whether you intended to or not, you are actually saying there's some foolish stuff about you that comes out of your character, the depth of who you are. So, we're not going to read every verse this morning for the sake of time, but I will highlight a few things that are in this chapter. In verse 2, a wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. He's not making some political statement here about right and left and liberals and conservatives. That's not where he's going. This is ancient literature. But in ancient literature, especially original Testament times, well, even in New Testament times, the right hand was for strength and honor and blessing. The left hand was the weak opposite side of that. It was weakness. It was not blessing. In fact, it could even be a curse to be part of the left. And I'm left-handed. You know the word sinister comes from the Latin that has to do with being left-handed. If you're left-handed, you're sinister. How many are left-handed this morning? Okay. And that's about right. It's a relatively small percentage of our population is left-handed. My family tried to force me to use my right hand. I have horror stories for you growing up. Trying to use, that's before every school had lefties, the scissors that actually work for left-handed kids. Now it's both, left or right-handed. They're not? Yeah. We can talk. If you went through that back in the day, I still remember. Okay, give me a second. Give me a second here. Kindergarten. You do all this worthless artistic stuff that nobody cares. But this, but that everybody chucks it at the end of the year, if not before. But they plaster it all on the wall at the school so everybody can see everybody's artwork. Nice, normal for kindergartner, Bruce's thing. Because I had to cut it out with right-handed scissors. And I always eventually gave up and tore it out because I could not make the right-handed scissors to work. Normal. What's wrong with this kid? That was on the wall. Okay, enough of that. Left-handed issues, sinister stuff. It is interesting also to note that many of our most recent presidents have been left-handed. Do you know that? Something about sinister stuff in the White House with left-handed, okay? The preacher is not making an issue about political stuff, but he is saying something about where the heart inclines. Is it towards things that God blesses and God honors and God uses, or is it away from that? Well, the fool goes away from that. In fact, one bad decision, one foolish decision, can mess up an entire plan. Verse 1, dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. There's so much truth to that. You can have a really good project or plan put together that you've worked on for days, months, years even. But one little silly folly, he says, one foolish mistake can what? Wreck the whole thing. Maybe you've been in a work environment where that has happened. What did you do? You wrecked everything our team has worked for. That's what he's talking about. Just a little bit, because we're inclined to do that, then it is probably going to happen. Now, verse 4, I love this. If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. Here's what he's talking about. The person who stands their ground remains calm, okay? And things typically settle down, right? But then there's the other person who has the angry temperament. Have you been around that type of person? Who, as he says, do not leave your place. In other words, the person who likes to blow up goes off in a huff. In an outrageous, could you, and you walk away. And I'm going to make a statement. I'm going to walk away from you, and how dare you do that, right? Does anyone care about the person who goes away in a huff? Nope. The only statement that person makes is just how ridiculous they are when they get angry because of their temperament or because of whatever, however they're wired or whatever the situation is. That's what he's talking about. A crazy person does not stand their ground and speak normally or rationally. The crazy person begins to walk away. All of these are examples of people who are, in little ways or maybe dramatic ways, missing the point. What is it that you should be doing, but instead you're trading that for foolish responses? Here's what I think, if we kind of group these verses together in a general way, here's one way to think of it, of a dramatic way to miss the point that happens a lot. Imagine the protester who joins the cause in the street with the sign or the placard or the bullhorn or whatever, and let's say the cause is homelessness or poverty. I'm going to go out and make my voice heard, and the city's going to have to respond by allocating funds and doing these things or whatever, and yelling about poverty and helping people, and the person who's doing that has a Starbucks in one hand, and they have the latest, most expensive cell phone in the other. Could it be, demonstrations at some point are meaningful and valid in our culture, but could it be that person is missing the point in trying to demonstrate that somebody else should pay for the needs of people that are present before me when I'm spending my money on myself? Guess what? If that's you, you're missing the point of your own personal responsibility and making yourself out to be a fool. That's what's going on in this first point. Whether you notice it or not, if your focus, and many times your focus is on the worth not of the person or not of the issue. Your focus is on the worth of yourself. And am I seen? Am I heard? Am I noticed in the midst of what's going on? That is a fantastic way to miss the point. Number 2, foolish people miss the point, and foolish people aren't prepared. This passage goes into an area that may look like fatalism. If we move on down here, verse 8, he who digs a pit will fall into it. Well, that could happen, and that would be really bad. He goes on to say, a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. Imagine your home DIY improvement plan, breaking through the sheetrock or whatever the substance is in your wall. And what happens? A snake pops out and bites your face. Not a really good thing, okay? But that could happen. What if, he goes on to say, use an example of a woodsman, somebody using an axe, and you're chopping away at trees or firewood, and you're doing it for hours, and it seems like I have to keep hitting it harder every time. What's going on? Is the fact that you're getting tired? Yeah, that may be part of it. But also, have you thought to stop and sharpen your axe? Well, you might want to do that to make the work before you just a little bit easier. The preacher isn't pushing fatalism, okay, with falling into the pit or, got bit by a snake, it's rough. What he's pushing and trying to teach here isn't fatalism, but it's realism. I like to think of myself as a hardcore realist in life and in ministry and in lots of different ways. So it's not that fatalism, it's going to happen, I've got no point. But within realism, we need to be confronted with this. I have a choice to make. I can be prepared for most things that come my way. Now, maybe not everything. We're all surprised by something, like how I could, but in most things, if I'm a Boy Scout and I'm prepared, I'm thinking about it. But if you're not a Boy Scout, then we really ought to adopt that motto. You really can't blame most things in life on random chance and fate. A fool doesn't really admit that, you know what? There might be times that things would happen to me, but if I'm prepared, they most likely won't. You get me? A fool says, I'm not going to be prepared. I'm not going to care to put in the time or to think through things. I'm just going to kind of randomly do things, and is not prepared because of that. So those are 2 things. And here's a third. Foolish people can't find their way home. Verse 15. The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way to the city. So I want to land on this last one here this morning and see where it takes us, okay? Fool doesn't know where he's going, doesn't know the way to the city. What's going on here, okay? He's wearying, he or she, they're getting tired, and here's what they're getting tired with, or because. Because of their constant searching to go somewhere, the constant questioning, they are, in what the writer says, the preacher says in verse 12, chapter 10, the words of a wise man's mouth will win him favor, but the lips of a fool will consume him. What's going on with foolish thinking and behavior is it's circular. I have questions about life. I have demands that I make before God that he better come through for me. But those questions and those arguments with the fool come back to him or her. Why? Because no one else has the authority to be able to speak to me something that is different than I've already decided upon. Does that make sense? You follow me? The fool says, I've really got it figured out anyway. And so therefore, I will resist what anybody else says because my preference is this. It's what I already have, even though I'm frustrated with it. Even though I'm sensing that my way of doing things is kind of leading me nowhere, I'm going to stick with it because it's all I've got. and it's something I've got, and if you suggest something that would threaten that, I'm going to push back. Nope, that can't be right, because I've already decided at least the general category of rightness. That becomes a foolish way to then keep the cycle going. That really goes nowhere. The argument and the conclusion, it really goes nowhere, and it ends in frustration. And even the author says, the preacher says, all these words, all this talk is evil madness, he says. There is no end. You can drive yourself crazy never finding the answer to the pursuit and the questions that you have. You can drive yourself nuts. It's not there, but I think it should be. I think it should be here, but time and time again, I keep proving it's not. So where is it? Where is the answer? How do I find what it is that I really sense is missing without going crazy? Well, the foolish person says, I'm just going to keep going in the same direction and keep doing a cycle, even though I know it's not taking me where I want. That's where he's getting at when he says he does not know the way to the city. Now, the ancient context would be this. If he's talking about actual physically going to the city, if you're not an infant, a young child, or if you're not incapacitated in some way, you know the way to the city. That's where you do your work and your trading, and that's where you meet the people you need to meet with, and so on and so forth. The way to the city is known. So it makes this example all the more foolish. You get me? For an adult to be called out as someone who doesn't know the way. You ought to know the way to the city. But you're living and acting in a way as if you don't. That's foolishness. No one does that. At least no one who isn't a fool does that. So, as I was studying, I was thinking about one of the parables that our men's Bible study went through recently, and one of my favorite parables of all of Jesus' parables. And I was thinking about that and how it compared to this, and a light starts going on in my head that's really usually kind of dark and dusty. And I start seeing, whoa, wait a second. There are some awesome parallels in what Jesus teaches us. So many times we have in the Gospels that Jesus presents himself, not just his teaching, but himself as the way and as a gate, not just as a light, and we talk about a lot during Advent time, but as the way, a way that's difficult, not easy, but it is certainly a way. In fact, he is the gate and the way. Jesus is. And that's what he teaches us. A way to where? Well, many times when we went through the Gospel of Mark, we talked about and we looked at how Jesus teaches about the kingdom of God. A whole new reality. If you are a follower of Jesus, then his kingdom, his rule, and you read kingdom, think rule, his authority, his government is in me. It's in my heart. And then he begins from my heart to change the rest of me. So that's the kingdom. So Jesus teaches about a way to the city. Now, not just if you extend all the way through the New Testament, you go to the book of Revelation, it is actually a city. The New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven. The place that was just under the authority of man is then fully known as under the authority of Jesus, the kingdom of God. If you know Handel's Messiah, anybody ever sing part of that? Or the kingdom of this world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. That's what we're singing about. That's what the New Testament, and especially the book of Revelation, leads us to. Do you know Handel's Messiah was written for Easter, not for Christmas, right? Do you know that? When it first premiered, people came at Easter time. But it gives us this whole meta-narrative, this whole big picture, not only the good Christmas stories that we associate with Handel's Messiah, and that's why we've come to sing it and listen to it at this time of year. But it doesn't end there. If you follow the music and the lyric, it goes all the way through the kingdom being established and the reign of Jesus in his city, the New Jerusalem. So we get this big, wonderful picture of Jesus being the gate, being the way that leads us on a path that is certain, even though rough, even though difficult, it is a certain journey that leads ultimately to the full realization of the kingdom that will, right now, we know in our hearts, but eventually will know in physical reality when the New Jerusalem comes to this earth. Isn't that awesome? So there's so much in the New Testament that directs back to this verse, that there is a way to the city that the foolish person, now again, like where we started, not the really bad foolish person, but the foolishness that's in all of us, doesn't see yet. How could God be directing me? Well, he does that on the way to the city through Jesus, and as Jesus teaches us, especially in the parables. So, I have the text from Luke here on the screen, and how Jesus uses a parable teaching about a guy on a way to the city, and what happens, not just in the parable, but especially in the one person that he's focusing this parable on, a lawyer. So here's how Jesus sets it up. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, that is Jesus, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Now this guy, you wouldn't tag the lawyer as a fool. I wouldn't either. But there are certain things about and coming out of his heart that would reveal some foolish stuff that he's still hanging on to. Because he's, like we just looked at, he's missed the point and he's not prepared. But Jesus gives him this opportunity to respond. He's missed the point of the law. He knows the law. He's a lawyer. He's lived by it. It's defined his life, and he answers correctly. And then Jesus, in his wisdom, says, "Do it and you'll live." The problem is he can't do it. He can't, at least not in its entirety, in all that the law demands. He knows he's a failure. He knows it. He's not prepared for where this takes him. Because he says, but he, desiring to justify himself, asks this further question. He knows deep inside that he knows the law and what it demands, and he's falling short. That's why he asked this, seeking to justify himself. How could I get just a little more teaching from the rabbi so I can finally be at peace? So I can finally have enough to know I'm fully justified. That's what I think is going on with the lawyer. And then how does Jesus respond? It's brilliant. We're going to spend a couple of moments in it. Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave him to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back.' Which of these 3, Jesus says, do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?" And the lawyer said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said, "You go and do likewise." What is really going on here? Think about it. You go and do likewise. Stop and consider what's going on. It's not a nice story with a good moral at the end. We can't compare or say that parables are like fables or like anything else from ancient literature, that you hear the story, right, and then you have the moral at the end, and then go do it. That's not what's happening here. If he's seeking to justify himself, Jesus does not say, well, here's just one more thing to do, and then you're justified. You're good, go. Just be more compassionate. I'm not saying that, and Jesus isn't either, not saying that showing compassion is a bad thing or you shouldn't do it. We all should have and hope to have enough of that moral fiber and character within us that when we see somebody in need, that we would go out of our way and stop and help them. But that can't justify you before a holy God, which is what he wants to have answered. You with me so far? That's where the parable takes on a whole new meaning. He's seeking to justify himself, and Jesus says that not to say just go do another good moral thing. That's not what he's doing to this guy. There is something far deeper that's going on. In fact, what I think Jesus does with this parable, and maybe not just him, but he's introducing a dilemma. So here's what you got to understand. For the lawyer to take Jesus' words at face value, he must go and be like what? A Samaritan. That's the brilliance of the story. If it was a Jew that stopped on the road and helped another Jew, or even helped a Samaritan for that matter, go and do likewise. Go and be a more moral person. But he uses intentionally in this parable the most hated, probably misunderstood, but the worst possible example of a person for a Jew to be confronted with. A Samaritan, a person you've always learned to hate all of your life. A Samaritan helped this guy. You go, and Jesus says, be like a Samaritan. A lawyer, a good Jew, would hear that and gag. In fact, in his response, what does he say? Does he use the word Samaritan? He can't even utter it. He says, the one who showed mercy. Or something like that. He had to have. He can't stand the thought of a Samaritan in any sense, especially doing something good, that extremely good, to another Jew? Are you kidding me? Go and be like that guy who I've always hated? I can't do that. Now, we don't hear the rest of the dilemma. That's another beauty and the brilliance of parables. Usually the door is wide open in the end. What do we do with that? If you understand the teaching, you're left at that moment. What? If I'm in the shoes of the lawyer, I say, I came seeking to justify myself, and you say this? That does not compute. I will not go there. Well, then where are you supposed to go with a story like this? He's right on the edge of staying a fool. Okay? He is confronted with a whole new reality that he was not prepared for. And what does he do with it? What if, we don't know what happens to the dilemma. I wish we did. What if he goes away and the gospel starts to work in him? What if he doesn't go away, forget it, I'll never do that, I can't do that, you're a whack. I'm not going to believe anything you say for just bringing up a Samaritan. What if the story doesn't end there with his heart? What if the story, the parable, begins a new turning point and the cycle stops for a moment? He has been questioned and he has been put on the spot by the ultimate authority. And it disagrees with his own. What if I'm wrong and he's right? What if I have to stop and be humble for a second and start thinking about life differently? I am not the ultimate authority. I will always fall short in justifying myself. I can't do it. This is proof of everything I've always struggled with. He has brought me to my knees, and I've got to now do something with it. I can choose to ignore it and say he's a fool, or what? I can say, I've been a fool all this time. All the ways I've tried to make life work. All the things that I've done and I've thought about. I can't keep doing that. He says, Jesus says, go and do likewise. And he brings up somebody I've always hated, or I've avoided, or I've ignored. What if Jesus has exposed his deepest fear? That before God he can never justify himself. what if the gospel keeps working in this lawyer or in us? And he says, you know what? I'm just as helpless as that guy on the road. That's me. Jesus wasn't just talking about some other general whatever person. I'm that guy, left to die in my own nakedness and blood. I cannot justify myself. In fact, I can't even save myself. I'm as good as dead. And someone comes along who I've ignored, I've pushed aside, I've worked around my whole life. And he knows that. And still, he stops and comes to me and treats my wounds. He doesn't have to do that. I've hated him. I've pushed him aside. He knows that, but he comes down and stops my bleeding. He addresses my needs at a moment where I'm desperate. He puts me on his donkey. He pays out of his own pocket. He gives of himself so that I can be saved. And that's where the gospel breaks through the moral of the parable to sink into my greatest need. I'm the guy on the road. I'm as good as dead. And the one that I've always rejected says, I love you. And I'm going to give myself so that you can be saved. I don't have to do it. I could walk along the road like all these other guys. But I'm going to make sure that you make it to the city. That's Jesus. That's what he does, so a fool like me can finally find his way home. Speaking and thinking of martyrs and missionaries, I can't help but think of Jim Elliot. And he spoke in his diary before he died. He wrote about foolishness. If you know him, you know what he said? He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, your teaching strikes me to the heart and drops me to my knees. I'm the guy that you stopped to save. And I didn't even ask for it. And I certainly didn't deserve it. And you gave yourself so I could be justified before a holy God. There was no other way except you made the way for me to come enter into your kingdom and be a part of your eternal city. Lord Jesus, if we're stuck in a foolish cycle where we think the only answer is what we've got, break it. Break it, Lord. Humble us so that we begin to see in a whole new depth, a whole new level, a whole different way. The answer cannot come from me. It's got to come from you. So open up our eyes and our ears to a new reality, a new gospel promise, and that your light and your way is the way for me. In Jesus' name, amen.